Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1731 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, regardless of their countries of origin, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran from the USA. In this episode, I'm going to take you down to Canberra, Australia, or, as my Aussie buddies say, Canberra. We're going to talk about the high regard the Australians hold their veterans. It's a wonderful thing to see. On the 25th of April, every year down in Australia, they hold an event called Anzac Day at the Australian War Memorial, right there in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. It's a big deal because Australians really do appreciate their veterans and the service that they do for their country. I am big on the Australians because they are wonderful people. Australia is a wonderful place. The Australians have stood shoulder to shoulder with the Americans in numerous wars, especially in the Vietnam War. They did a good job there. Just look at what they did at the Battle of Long Tan. That was an event where 110 Anzac soldiers took on 2,000 NVA and whooped them all over the place. Those Australians are tough, and they demonstrated that fact at Long Tan. They're continuing to demonstrate it with how they handled the coronavirus situation this year when it appeared that it might put their Anzac Day celebrations in peril. But they didn't let it happen. They had the celebration anyway so they could remember their veterans. There was a story about the 2020 Anzac Day ceremonies on 7 News. 7 News just happens to be the number one news outlet in the entire country of Australia, from the East Coast to the West Coast, from the Northern Coast to the Southern Coast. They're number one. That's the main reason I wanted to share this story with you, because it tells a great story about a great people and a great country. Title of the story, which I'm going to share with you, is Anzac Day 2020 Virus-Era Commemorations Take Place Around Australia. That's right. Those Australians don't let a little thing like the coronavirus get in the way, which just happens to be the little brother of the Hong Kong flu that hit the world in 1968, right in the middle of the Vietnam War. 100,000 Americans died as a result of the Hong Kong flu. We handle that, and we can handle this. And the Aussies are showing us how to do it. This story was submitted by Mr. Paul Osborne of 7 News. Let's take a look at what he has to report about the Anzac Day ceremonies for 2020 in Australia. Dateline, Canberra, Australia. Scott Morrison has reminded all Australians the Anzacs have passed on a torch to be carried into the future. He is the Prime Minister of Australia. He drew on the words of his wartime predecessor, Mr. John Curtin. He was the Prime Minister during World War II, as he gave the address to a crowd-free commemorative service held inside the Australian War Memorial in Canberra in line with coronavirus restrictions. Here in Canberra, on this day, 75 years ago, and the midst of war, our then Prime Minister, John Curtin, called for every citizen to give equal measure of devotion, what our servicemen and women give every day. He reminded Australia that the original Anzacs handed on a torch, clenched and carried high, and that is passed on to every generation of Australians. This Anzac Day, it's been passed to us. And so together, and faith in each other, and guided by the lives and examples of those who've gone before, we grasp the torch and we raise it high again, lighting up the Anzac dawn, lest we forget. Mr. Morrison delivered his speech alongside the Roll of Honor, which marks the names of 102,000 Australian and New Zealand men and women who have died in service. Through these 102,000 men and women and the millions more who've worn our nation's uniform, we come to understand what love of family, community, and country truly means, Mr. Morrison said. He also paid tribute to his grandfather, Gunner Leslie John Smith, who served Australia in Sir Rawdon Cutler's VC's 2nd 5th Field Regiment as part of the AIF's 7th Division in World War II. They probably duked it out with the Germans in North Africa. A didgeridoo sounded the beginning of the National Commemorative Service. Marches have been canceled for only the third time in Australia's history, the last time in 1942 and previously during the devastating Spanish flu outbreak. Following the ode, the last post, a minute's silence, and reveille, Australians have been encouraged to stand in their driveways at 6 a.m. with a candle or torch to light up the dawn. Many, such as Queensland girl Michaela Gonzalez, plan to play instruments such as bugles and trumpets. That's a wonderful thing they did, and many thousands of Australians did just that. At 6 o'clock in the morning on Anzac Day, they held up that light. I'm now going to play the ode and the last post so you can get a sense of how the Australians feel about their veterans.
Shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them, lest we forget.
That's what the Australians are doing to show their appreciation for their veterans on Anzac Day, regardless of the coronavirus restrictions. I think it's a great thing that they do down there in Australia to honor their veterans, and it makes me feel good about our veterans, hearing what other countries are doing for their veterans. And it makes me feel even better about the service our veterans have given to this country up here in the USA. I would like to take this opportunity to show my appreciation to the nation of Australia for the wonderful way they honor their veterans. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1731 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these stories. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?